At this point, we already know a lot of Pygame. We know how to manipulate surfaces, how to load images, how to update the display window. But we're missing a major component of most programs, and that is collecting user input. You probably don't just want to load an image onto a screen and have people stare at it. You probably want to have users interact with your computer in some way, be that through clicking a mouse or typing keys. And this video is going to go over how to do that. So, user input in Pygame is typically managed via a main game loop. This is not my term. This is a term that's commonly used in documentation and online tutorials that you're likely to encounter if you look more Pygame up on the internet. And before we look at how to write this in code, let's just think about how this works in words, what the basics of the algorithm are. So what we're going to do is store all user interactions, mouse clicks, key presses, etc., as events. Don't worry too much about what an event is. We're just going to call it an event. And every piece of interaction, every click of the mouse, every movement is going to be stored as a separate event. Then, every few milliseconds, we generate a list of events that have transpired in the prior few milliseconds. So maybe the user moved the mouse and pressed a key and clicked a button, and we'll record those as 3 events and put those in a list. And then after a few milliseconds pass, we'll do this again. We'll check what happened and we'll put that into a list. And we'll just continue doing this. And then for each event that we get in our event list, we'll handle it in some way. And how we handle it is up to us as programmers. We could choose to update the display, close the game, ask for input. Depends on the program you're writing, but we'd want to handle the events that happen. And then we just repeat this process indefinitely until the game ends. That's the basic idea. So, those are words, this is code. It's not too bad, but maybe a little intimidating. So let's walk through it step by step. So these upper 2 lines are just establishing the loop. I set this running variable to true. The while loop will execute as long as this expression evaluates to true. And so while running, while true, we'll make sure that this loop continues to execute for the duration of our game. And that's how we get the part of our algorithm where we make sure this goes on and on and on until the game ends. And then when our game is over, we can just set this running variable to false, and then the loop will no longer execute, and we can close Pygame down. Now the next line uses this expression pygame.event.get, and this is just Pygame's built-in function for generating a list of events, or a sequence of events, that happened in the prior few milliseconds. Technically, it's all the events that happened since the last time this function was called. So we'll call this function and it'll say, oh, the user pressed a key and clicked a mouse, and those will be stored as events. So again, this begs the question, what exactly is an event? And still you don't have to worry about it. It's just Pygame's internal representation of user input. Technically, an event is an object, if you know about object-oriented programming in Python, but if you don't worry about it. It's just Pygame's representation of input. And again, every piece of input is just an event. Okay? And then we'll put these in a list, and then we'll iterate through them. So we'll say for every event in this list, we're going to handle it. And then these last 2 lines, or few lines, are where we actually do the handling. Now, in order to handle events, we need to know their type, because we might want to handle a key press and a mouse click in different ways. And so what we'll want to have is a series of if statements that check the types. So first we'll do if event.type, and event.type just checks the type of the event. Every event has this built-in type attribute. We'll check if it equals some built-in Pygame event type. So I wrote type 1, that's not an actual type, but maybe this is a mouse click or a key down or a mouse movement or some other type of event. And you can look up all the built-in Pygame event types. and we just write pygame dot whatever event type, and we check whether the event equals this type. So maybe the event type is a key press, and we check whether it equals a key press, and it does. Then we'd go inside and we'd do something. We'd handle it in some way, and that's up to us. And then we'd have another condition that checks whether it's a mouse click, and maybe this particular event is not a mouse click, so we skip this. And we just have a sequence of if statements for handling as many types of events as we want to. And if there are certain events we don't care about, then we don't even need statements for those. And this loop that we see here is actually the entire main game loop. This is all the code that we need. This encapsulates the full algorithm that we wrote out in words. And again, you can add other things inside this do stuff area. That's how you handle it. But the basic framework of the game loop is fairly simple, and it's fairly consistent across any program you might write. Event types. So let's learn a little more about these. So you might wonder, what exactly are these event types that Pygame provides? And there's a lot of them, but we'll hit some highlights here. First, there's a quit event. And a quit event occurs when the user tries to close the game display window. So just to show you, when you open the display window, it'll be a window like this, and it'll have an X in the upper right corner. And if the user clicks that, that generates a quit event. Just wait for this to load. Then there's a key down event, which means that a user pressed a key. There's a key up, which means a key was released. Mouse motion, the mouse was moved. Mouse button down and up for clicks on the mouse. A user event, which is a custom event that you can define if you want to have an event for some particular behavior that's relevant to your game. And I'm not going to cover that in this tutorial, but there's plenty of information online. And even many more events as well. For example, there's joystick events. If you plug in a joystick and move it left or right, there's built-in events that can handle that. Now, 2 notes before we move on. First, you might wonder, this seems like a lot of things, like key down and key up and mouse motion. Is every time I press a key and then I release it and then I move the mouse a little in some direction, are all of those separate events? And the answer is yes. Pygame has a pretty fine granularity on what's counted as an event, and ultimately I think you'll appreciate this when creating your games, because you might be writing a program where releasing a key and pressing a different key, you want different behaviors and moving the mouse different directions. And this granularity will allow you to check for that fairly easily. And then second, you might wonder how exactly you should handle these events. Is there some specific procedure you should do for when the mouse button is down? And the answer is no. It's entirely up to you as the programmer. You can handle events however you want. We're just going over a framework for checking which events occurred, and then how you handle it is up to you. However, there are a few common behaviors for how you might want to handle a few of these events. And so we'll go through those in the next few slides. First, the quit event. So a quit event occurs when the user tries to close the display window, as I said. And typically this is just handled by exiting out of the loop and calling pygame.quit. So in code, again, we set up our loop and we generate events, and we check the type, and here we're going to check whether the type equals a pygame.quit event, and it does have to be in all caps. And if it does, then we will just set running equal to false. And if running equals false, the loop will stop executing, and then we'll call pygame.quit after. So this will effectively close the display window when the user clicks the X. Now again, you don't have to do this. This is entirely up to you. You could handle a quit event in some other way if you want to, like you could print the message, ha ha ha, you can't quit my game. But it's probably best to just quit if the user wants to. Now, key down events. A key down event occurs when a user presses a key on the keyboard, and again, you can handle this however you want. But often you'll want to check which particular key was pressed. So Pygame's key down event is a generic event for all keys. Like there's no separate event for the H key and the G key and the left key and the right key. They're just all key down events. So if you want to check which key was pressed, and you probably do, you maybe want your character to move up if the up key is pressed and jump if the A key is pressed, then you need a little bit more machinery. And you can do it using this. So over here, event.key, this is called on an event, and it's going to return the particular key that was pressed. We press the A key, it'll return the A key. And you're going to check whether it equals a particular, or Pygame's particular name for the key. So this key name, there's a bunch of key names that correspond to the keys on the keyboard, and here we might replace key name, which is just a generic expression, with Pygame's name for the A key. And we check whether the key equals the A key, and if it does, then we do something. We might have a whole sequence of checks where we check whether a key equals a particular key name, and if it does, then we handle it in some particular way. So a little bit more about these key names. Again, Pygame has a unique key name representation for every key on the keyboard, and even some that you probably don't have on your keyboard. And you can just look these up online if you want to find one for a particular key. There's a link to the docs. But let's look at a couple examples. So the code for the backspace, code like Pygame's code, is K underscore backspace in all caps. The code for the letter A is K underscore A. Now A is not in caps, and the code for the up arrow is K underscore up. So those are some examples. There's many, many more. Some of them are intuitive, some of them are not intuitive. Just look them up if you have a particular key that you want to check for. Okay, so what does this all look like when we throw it in a main game loop? Well, again, we have this loop construct, and then we're going to check the events. And if the event type equals a key down event, then we have a little more checking to do. We want to see which key was pressed. So here we're going to say if event.key equals pygame.k underscore s, that means Pygame's name for the S key. And if it does, we'll print out S is for Sky. Otherwise, if it equals the M key, we'll print out M is for Monsi. And then we'll just continue this in a loop. So you can see that even with the simple or the small amount of Pygame that we've learned so far, we can write a simple program that maybe helps children learn the alphabet or something like that. Let's use everything we've learned to improve our dog-squirrel simulation. So here I have the code that we wrote before. You remember that where we got is we were able to load images of a dog and squirrel onto the display and show it to the user for 10 seconds. That's pretty good, but there's a few problems with what we have so far. The first one is this right here. You don't want to write things like time.sleep in your code and just pause the window. There's much better ways to make the display window wait for a user. Again, this is sort of a hack that I just did to show you that we actually accomplished something. So this is one problem. And the second problem is what happens when a user tries to exit out of the game window. So I'll demonstrate that now and watch what happens. So as you can see, that behavior is not ideal. Can you imagine if your favorite games did this? It's like you were done playing the game and you tried to exit out, and then it said not responding, and then you had to open a separate window and close the window. You'd probably never play that game again. So we want to fix this behavior. We want the user to be able to exit out. We don't want to use this hack. We can solve both those problems by replacing this code with a main game loop. So let's do it. So I'm going to delete this. I'll delete this import time statement because we don't need it anymore. And here we will write some useful variables for the loop. For now, we'll just have running equals true, and we'll add to this later. And then down here, we'll have our main game. So So we'll say while running, as we did before, and then we'll say for each event in pygame.event.get, which generates our list of events. Say if the event type equals pygame.quit in all caps, that's a quit event, we'll set running equal to false. And if running equals false, the group will stop executing and Pygame will properly shut down and not generate weird error messages. So just to prove that this works, let's try it out again. Beautiful. So just with a small amount of Pygame we've learned, you can write a program that just displays an image and then you can close it. Fantastic. If you watch the future videos, we'll turn this game into something a bit more interesting. But we're done for now.